In today's episode of Psychology Podcast, I'm going to talk about a trait that can either push you to greatness or make your life miserable. That trait is perfectionism. The key thing to understand is that perfectionism is not always bad. There are two types. One that works in your favor and another that makes anything you try in life feel like a burden. The healthy type is what psychologists call personal standard perfectionism, PSP. This form of perfectionism is all about self-improvement. You set high standards for yourself because you want to, and not because you feel pressured to. Your motivation comes from within, and you genuinely enjoy the process of improving. High achievers in sports, business, and the arts frequently embody this mindset. They pursue excellence purely for the love of mastering their craft. On the other hand, the unhealthy type is what they call external concern perfectionism, ECP. This is where perfectionism becomes a burden. Instead of striving for excellence for personal growth, you feel an overwhelming need to be perfect out of fear. It could be the fear of judgment, the fear of failure, or the fear of disappointing others. So, this perfectionism is not about passion or progress, it is about avoiding rejection. Those who struggle with ECP believe they must be flawless in order to be accepted, respected, or loved. For many people, whether you develop healthy or toxic perfectionism often depends on your childhood experiences and the relationship you had with your parents. Most people who struggle with external concern perfectionism grew up in a home where mistakes were not tolerated. Think back. Did love and approval feel conditional? Did it seem as though your worth depended entirely on your achievements or how well you performed? If so, you might have grown up believing that the only way to earn your parents' love was to be perfect at everything you did. But here's the problem. Perfection was never truly achievable. No matter how well you performed, it was never enough for your parents. For example, if you scored 90% on a test, they'd focus on the 10% you missed. Another example. In sports, even if you played well and your team won, your parents might still criticize you for a missed shot, a minor mistake, or not scoring as many points as they expected. Over time, these experiences taught you that your parents would never truly be satisfied. If you failed at something, they fixated on your mistakes, and even when you succeeded, they insisted you could and should have done better. Your brain eventually learned that no matter what you did, you couldn't win. Fixing mistakes seemed pointless because in the end, nothing you achieved was ever truly good enough. The real curse of toxic perfectionism is that you desperately want to excel at everything you do. But the moment you encounter a mistake or obstacle, your brain panics and shuts down. Instead of addressing the issue directly, you beat yourself up, procrastinate, feel like you'll never be good enough, or quit and avoid the task altogether. And there's a reason for this. Your medial frontal gyrus, MFG, the brain region responsible for decision-making and cognitive control, is impaired. This means that if you struggle with external concern perfectionism, your brain is wired differently. This causes you to avoid or shut down in response to errors. So basically, your brain tries to protect you by disengaging whenever it senses failure. This means that for those struggling with toxic perfectionism, procrastination or giving up at the first obstacle becomes a survival mechanism. However, for people with personal standard perfectionism, the healthy perfectionism, The brain reacts in a completely different way. When someone with PSP makes a mistake, a different part of the brain takes over, the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC. The ACC functions as the brain's built-in error detection system. Rather than shutting down, it slows down your thinking and forces you to analyze what went wrong so you can find a solution. In other words, PSP individuals process mistakes calmly and use them as opportunities to improve. Again, this all traces back to early childhood experiences. People with PSP grew up in an environment where making mistakes was safe. They weren't constantly judged, criticized, or held to impossible standards. For example, when they accomplished something, they were praised and congratulated. When they made mistakes, their parents reassured them and guided them toward learning rather than making them feel like failures. This kind of upbringing wired their brains to see mistakes as a natural part of growth rather than something to fear. So, if you struggle with ECP perfectionism, your brain will push you to quit whatever you are doing the moment you make a mistake. To break this pattern, you have to be self-aware and accept the mistake. This slows down the MFG, supports problem solving, and helps you complete the task at hand. So, instead of avoiding the mistake, you must observe it, and instead of spiraling into self-criticism, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Remember that everyone faces obstacles and makes mistakes. The key is to not let your brain block you from working through them. Additionally, what's interesting is that PSP and ECP exist on a spectrum. They create 4 different combinations that shape how you think, what drives you, and what influences your motivation. The first combination is high ECP and low PSP. This creates the approval seeker. The approval seeker is driven by the need for external validation and lacks strong personal standards. He focuses entirely on meeting other people's expectations rather than improving for his own sake. His sense of achievement depends on how others perceive him, not on his own internal goals or progress. For example, a student works hard to get good grades. But if his efforts go unnoticed or unappreciated, he feels discouraged and stops trying. This is problematic because his motivation depends entirely on external approval rather than a genuine desire to learn and improve. The second combination is low ECP and low PSP. This is where you've stopped caring about others and yourself. The main line of thinking for this type is, I don't care what people think. But I also don't have any real goals for myself. This combination is where people become disengaged, unmotivated, and directionless, without any personal or external expectations to push you forward. You simply make zero efforts. For example, this is the student who doesn't study and fails his classes because he lacks both self-motivation and concern for others' opinions. The third combination is low ECP and high PSP, or what we could call the lone wolf. The main line of thinking of the lone wolf is, I do things my way and only care about my standards. I don't care what anyone else thinks. At first glance, this sounds great. After all, independence and self-motivation are valuable traits. But only caring about your own perspective isn't always the best strategy. For example, if you are an entrepreneur and focus only on your ideas without considering market demand or customer needs, your product will fail no matter how much effort you put into it. The same applies to relationships. If you only focus on your own needs and desires without considering your partner's feelings or expectations, then the relationship will struggle. External concern is actually useful as long as you're not dependent on it. The last combination is high ECP and high PSP, where you set high personal standards first while also recognizing the value of external concern. Here, you think, I set my own high expectations, but I also use feedback to refine and improve. My opinion matters just as much as others. The best solution for most people is to move to this category. The key to making this shift is to focus on your standards first. This means your sense of purpose comes from within, but you remain open to feedback because it provides valuable perspectives you might not have considered. This doesn't mean ignoring others, but filtering feedback through your own judgment. For example, if a writer receives criticism on their book, they don't blindly accept or reject it. Instead, they consider whether the feedback aligns with their vision. If a suggestion improves the story, they apply it. If it contradicts their intent, they respectfully disregard it. The key thing to remember is that even as you work toward your own standards, you might still feel that old fear of disappointing others. And that's okay. You don't have to choose between caring about others and caring about yourself. You can do both.